So yeah, that was kind of his insight, and it wasn't a diss so much, but I think he was just kind of talking about the hierarchy of the sport, and this has turned into a sport. The UFC spent so long making it into a sport, and now it seems to be like they're contradicting themselves.
Yeah, well, Joe's contradicting himself as well. Listen, I respect Joe. Joe's a very smart man, and he's very learned on the subject of mixed martial arts and the UFC. He's been around forever. He knows the sport. But as I say, he kind of contradicted himself. He's like, well, why have title fights? But then he says, I for sure would get the popcorn and buy this pay-per-view. See, to become a champion, you have to pay your dues, which I did for a long time. When you become the champion, it changes because now it's only a very small portion, but you get a portion of the pay-per-view. You don't get that when you're not the champion. Now I'm the champion, I get a small portion of the pay-per-view. Now, every single fight that you have, there's a possibility you're going to lose that fight. So you want to maximize that potential. You want the fights to be as big as possible. So it's going to be as big as possible, but in terms of credibility as well, that has to be a factor. Now, with George St. Pierre coming back, I feel like I'm trying to justify a point that I've said a million times, but Joe actually just said there himself he would buy the fight himself. He 100% would buy it. So therefore, there goes my argument. And he also said later on that he doesn't believe me when I say I'll do a quick turnaround. Because the thing is, I'm not trying to avoid Yoel Romero. That is not my intention here. When I fought Dan Henderson, and I've said this before on the show, they offered me that fight and I took the fight. Now, they've offered me George St. Pierre. I'll tell you, the reason I did talk about wanting that fight with George St. Pierre, that was only because originally Dana offered me that fight back in October. I never even thought about a fight with George St. Pierre had Dana not offered me that fight. Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. But he put that in my head. But that's why I said, listen, I will do a quick turnaround and fight George St. Pierre. And Joe Rogan saying that's crazy, that's ludicrous. Well, actually, it's not. It's not crazy. It's not ludicrous. And it's not beyond the realms of imagination because George St. Pierre, in many ways, is the perfect warm-up fight for Yoel Romero because they've got very similar styles. Yes, Yoel is bigger and Yoel hits harder, but they're both got fantastic wrestling. They're both shorter guys than me. There is many similarities.
They're both hard to understand.
They're both hard to understand, and they're slowly but surely both turning into cocksuckers. So, so if I do that, if I fight George St. Pierre, I'm pretty confident in not getting hurt in that fight. Of course, if I get hurt, that changes everything. But if I don't get hurt, then say we fight. I don't know when it is. Let's say UFC 215 for argument's sake. UFC 217. I'll do it. Well, I'll do it because I don't want all the work I've done, all the wrestling work that I've done. I don't want that. I don't want to get rusty in that regard.
Well, that was the point that they had made in the ESPN clip. They were like, oh, well, you think Michael Bisping is going to get this huge multi-million-dollar payday and then just the next day turn around, get back into a camp. But what you're saying is it wouldn't even be that. You would, at that point, you kind of getting out of camp and then taking a break would be more detrimental toward your training toward Romero as opposed to jumping right back in.
So here's the thing. If we do, let's say if we called it two pay-per-views later, what's that going to be? I don't know, 8 or 9 weeks. Something, roughly something like that. If I'm in the peak of physical fitness, which hopefully I will be for the George St. Pierre fight, I'll take a little time off. I'll go on a holiday with my family. I'm not going to get a big payday from the UFC and disappear and think, oh my God, I'm rich, and disappear. Yeah. I've been a part of the UFC for a long time, and I've been compensated fairly well, and we live a decent life. So I could go on holiday anytime I want. I'll take a little time, a little vacation with the family because it will be summer, hopefully, and then I'll ease back into the training, and I'll keep the momentum going. I'll keep the wrestling practice, the jiu-jitsu, and all the work that I did for the GSP fight. I'll keep that going. I'll keep it fresh in my mind, and then fight Yoel. That would be the perfect scenario. Of course, unless I get injured, which I don't think I will.
Well, I really want to see Yoel Romero get a shot at the title. And I know he's waiting. Yeah, I know. I mean, he's waiting right now for this, what I think is an interesting fight between Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre. I think that's an interesting fight. I don't like it. in terms of the hierarchy of the division. I think that as far as the division goes, it's not good at all. I mean, it sort of hijacks the whole situation.
So how are you gonna feel when after St. Pierre wins the title, he fights Anderson Silva?
I don't think he's going to, and I don't think he's going to. I mean, I think if he wins the title, I think he's probably going to vacate it and fight someone else, another big money fight.
Yeah.
If I had to guess,
yeah,
I definitely don't know. But if I had to guess, I would think he's probably going to do that.
Well, when they're sitting up there at the press conference, I actually asked Dana White that exact question. Do you have any reservations about booking somebody to a title fight that he might not want to defend? And Dana White basically told me that, hey, we've had these conversations. We have plans. We're just not telling you them right now. My question to you is, Joe, my question to you is, and I guess that response speaks for itself to a certain extent.
That sounds like something my dad would say. We're not telling you. We know how to do it. You shut up and go to bed.
How do you feel about all this? It's something that we've been talking about a lot this year. There's interim titles everywhere you look. There's guys chasing money fights. Yeah,
I don't like it.
You think it's a slippery slope, and are you actually concerned? 100%. I guess, are you concerned with the direction the sport's going?
I'm not concerned because there's great fighters, and you get them together and you make great fights. I'm not concerned at that, but from a purist point of view, and from someone who feels like, look, if you're going to have a champion and you're going to have these divisions where one man rules over the division, there should be a very clear hierarchy. I mean, this was something that really bothered me about the Ronda Rousey-Amanda Nunes fight. I'm like, look, you're doing all these amazing promos. They're fantastic, but you're only highlighting this one fighter. You're only highlighting Ronda Rousey. Like, the other woman is the champion. She's the champion of the world. And that's a very important distinction. And that has to be respected. And if you have a champion and you have, all these people that are waiting in line to get a shot at that champion, the person who is perceived to be the best in that division is the one who should be fighting the champion next. The champion should always be fighting the number one available challenger. Right now, that is Yoel Romero.
Yeah.
I get that George St. Pierre's come back, and I get that Michael Bisping feels like he deserves a big money fight, and I agree with him. Michael's had a long career in the UFC, and he's a great fighter, and against all odds, became the UFC middleweight champion on a very short notice fight against a guy who had already beat him in the first round, and Luke Rockhold, and he winds up knocking him out. All props to him. Comes back, he defends against Dan Henderson. Beats him in a decision. Good for him. It's great. I think I see Michael Bisping's point that he deserves that big money fight.
Yeah.
But as a person who deeply respects the position of champion, I think if you're gonna do this whole interim title thing, and you're gonna have guys come back after being out of the sport for 3 years and get a shot right at the title, why have championships at all? Ooh, I swore. What happens when you swear? You guys have a beeper over there?
Yeah, we got. You'll beep there.
All right. My apologies. I guess so used to doing podcasts. But why have a champion at all? It just set up great fights. And if you're just setting up great fights, well, that's a great fight.
Yeah.
Bisping versus GSP is a great fight. But if you're going to have a title, this is the champion of the world, then the champion should be defending his title against the number one challenger in the world. And that right now is Yoel Romero. But
100%.
More people by far know who George St. Pierre is and Yoel Romero, so Michael Bisping will make more money. It's a lucrative fight for George St. Pierre to come back to. I think WME and whatever this, what do they call the company now? It's not, do they still call it Zuffa? I should probably know this, huh? I work for them.
What does your check say when you get it?
I don't look at it.
Yeah, I think it's Zuffa.
I think he's got direct deposit on that.
Yeah, I'm busy, but I think that look, there's two ways I look at it. One, I look at it like, man, I can't wait to see what happens. George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping. Yeah, I'm down. If that was on pay-per-view, 100% I would buy that.
Yeah.
Like if I was just sitting at home and you told me that Bisping was going to fight George St. Pierre tonight, I'd be like, all right. This is great. Get the popcorn. Let's get the party started. But when it comes to someone who respects the position of champion, well, the champion should really be fighting the number one challenger. And, you know, Michael says that he's going to fight George, and then 6 weeks later he said he'll be ready to fight Yoel Romero right afterwards. But I wouldn't believe that if it was Yoel Romero. When was the last time anybody ever did that? Has anybody ever defended the title against a former world champion and an all-time great, and then 6 weeks later defend the title again? I mean, come on, get out of here.
I'm sure that Michael Bisping is going to get the biggest payday of his career and want to hop right back into camp for a guy like Yoel Romero. That seems very reasonable to me.
I see him drunk in Vegas and those in like an English flag underwear, you know, having a great time.
Yep.
I think he's going to make a giant payday, and that's good for him. I get it.